pause, silence. Let's reconvene in person again, to reconnect, to tell our stories, to listen, to disarm ourselves of preconceived notions, to reframe, to reflect, to unplug. Welcome to #Unplugged22. Take a victory lap. High five a friend. This is your moment, our moment. Together, we unplug to connect again and remember why we started. Let's evaluate our community and our digital impact with quality conversations rooted in context. We're about real connections that translate into real life action. Brought to you by Jam Lab Africa and the Civic Tech Innovation Network.
Good afternoon, all. Thanks so much for joining us today. So I see we've mostly got open uppers in at the moment. I don't know if we should give it a couple of minutes before we dive into the presentation. Gabby, what do you think?
I mean, we're so used to it always being us.
We could have a really nice echo chamber session.
Story of our life. We can just move ahead. Let's do that. And then, keep it tight.
Okay, perfect.
If you want.
So now I'm going to explain all about Open Up to everyone. No, I'm just joking. Welcome to our virtual session, and thanks for joining us today on this creative journey that we will take you on. I think first things first is this workshop. We want it to be a very kind of informal and practical workshop where we're sharing ideas with one another. So at any point, feel free to raise your hand. It's on just below your picture on the top right corner. You can see a raise hand feature, and then over there, I can pass it over the speaker option to you. Otherwise, if you don't want to speak out loud, you're more than welcome to use the Q&A, which is also up there on the top right section. So today, our workshop. Let me share this PDF with you. So today's workshop, entitled People Impact, No Needs for Hobson's Choice in Civic Tech Design Methodology. So in today's presentation, we'll be looking at strong project methodologies and how we use them in our Civic Tech work. Firstly, when it comes to designing Civic Tech projects, we find that it's important to have strong basis for the way that we do our work. This is grounded by research, often coming directly from the users. As a UX researcher, we found that just by following kind of outlining project details and following that to the T won't solve the problem that we're generally trying to solve, because a lot of other factors come into play during those times. There's many different nuances that we need to look at when designing project methodologies. At Open Up, we're quite used to grappling in this space. But we feel that it's very important to discuss amongst other colleagues that are working in similar environments and similar spaces on how they grapple with these different projects and these different things. I think when it comes to designing very simple projects or programs, especially when users are coming or clients are coming in, those things become a little bit easier because you can design exactly what you want them to take home the session, whether it's knowledge or skills or certain resources, if that's what your project's about. But when it comes to civic tech programs, it becomes a little bit more complicated. There's a lot more different people and ideas that come into play. And I think it's not always the idea that clients may come with solves the problem that they were necessarily coming in to solve. And a lot of different data and project information needs to be collected and managed in certain ways. But I think that gets us to the first problem, and the reason why we need good project methodologies is when we have all this information coming in, it's very difficult to manage it and understand it in a way that will be useful to the project. So that's why we adopt different methodologies. One of the methodologies that we use often at Open Up is a theory of change. where we identify certain outcomes and then develop outputs that will help us reach those outcomes, which move us towards our end goal of what each of the projects or our tools are trying to achieve. I think also in this workshop, I will use the word tool, product, and project quite interchangeably, because often our tools are associated to our products. Sometimes a tool would be the central feature of a program or a product that we've created. So just to introduce you a bit about what we're going to cover today, we're going to briefly explore, discuss, and grapple with the complexities of implementing a project. And this is specifically within the civic tech space. So designing tools using technology. A lot of the work that we do is looking at data visualization tools and looking at different industry experts and how they're able to view this data and understand more about the field in which they're trying to add impact. I think it ranges from procurement, or the kind of work that we do ranges from procurement data to public money spending to evictions and also to youth development. I think there's a lot more other things that I haven't mentioned there, but feel free to go onto our site, openup.org.za, and have a look at some of the other projects and programs that we do run and do. Reviewing types of issues that arise when working on social change projects or programs, reimagining. So this is really one of the important goals of what we wanted to do in today's session, is reimagine project design methodologies for the future. How do we, so later we'll talk about some of the perverse things that can happen when there isn't strong project methodologies put in place, but how do we reimagine this? Whether it's redesigning matrices to just understanding the way that we have different team feedback sessions. But how does this look in the future, and how will this move us to more impactful projects and programs? And then what are some of the tools, techniques, and methods that we can use? So we'd really love to hear back from everyone about what they use within their organizations. I see still mostly Open Up is here, but even sometimes within projects that you work in. So what are we here for? Besides myself and Gabby discussing some of the nuances that we've experienced and how that's played out, we also really do want to hear back from you. We've got the tennis rackets and a brain in between, because one of the things that we really feel is important is that we grapple with these ideas and that we play with one another's kind of imagination and creativity. And I think anyone that's watched a good tennis match or a good racket sport match knows that it does take two to tango when it comes to these kind of things. And I really want to encourage everyone that there's no kind of wrong answer. This is a creative space for us all to kind of grapple with the ideas about different project methodologies and how we can kind of introduce them into our projects and programs to have stronger, more impactful projects. So I'll move into the simple boat analogy that I like to kind of use when it comes to this kind of work, when it comes to methodologies. And this kind of simple boat idea is following contractually, if there's an outline of how a project should run, and you had to design this simple boat and build everything to specification. When it comes to actually delivering the product and putting it into the space, so in this example, in the proverbial lake where we're going to go test our boat for the first time, if all things haven't been checked, if we don't know what the weather is doing for that day or what the current of that, what the current inside that lake is like, we're not too sure whether our boat that we've designed to specification will float or whether or how it will work. So this kind of example, this analogy, is just to show that we need to constantly test the different elements of our project, or in this example of our boat, against different things. So possibly doing research of what the previous year's anything that floats race went like. Was it windy? What were the conditions like? And then understanding that when we're building our boat, whether this may mean we want to put more sinkers in the bottom of our bottle to add more weight to the project, or more weight to our design of what we wanted to do. And I think this idea is just around being able to have constant feedback within our teams and having a methodology that encompasses that, where we're able to, from the researchers to product owners to project managers to the developers, are all able to feedback and have equal weighting in our ideas and our opinions about how to have a successful project. And that's just internally. I think every good project methodology or project design methodology also has equal weighting for the user feedback that you're getting. That would probably come in from our research side. So looking at today's agenda, I've just done a brief introduction. So now we'll move into the workshop warmer. And then Gabriella, our director at Open Up, will introduce the human presentation, human, depending on how you like to say it. And then we'll move into the activities for the day. We've got 3 activities. The first one will be on exploring problems. Then we'll look at solving problems and then understanding complexity. Finally, we'll move into our roundup or our parking lot session, where we'll hopefully tie all these ideas around methodologies together. So for the workshop warmer, could we each either take turns to raise our hand or just pop into the chat what your name is, where you're coming from, or which organization you're coming from, which country that's in, and then what are you excited about today's session, or what would you like to get out of today's session? Feel free to answer either of those 2 questions or both. I'll give everyone a chance to just add their comments to the Q&A, and then I'll pass over to Gabriella. I'll give everyone 1 more minute. Oh, I think that's I think everyone is pretty much has posted. Thanks everyone for your comments. Yeah, if everyone would like to go over and just have a read, it's in the Q&A section. I'll just post my one. And I'll pass over to you, Gabby. Thanks. You can just let me know when I need to switch to the next slide.
You can be my slide person. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Hi, everyone. I know everyone here, and I'm glad to see all of you. And so we've done this presentation before, but I think, really is, it really is a work in progress, thinking about how you actually implement proper UX design in a civic technology context is, I think, a lot more complicated than is sometimes appreciated. And, we don't often get to step back and do the thinking work. So I'm always glad to see, when organizationally we also have a strong presence in these meetings, because I think it's a fun opportunity for all of us. So if you can just turn to the next slide, please, Jono, because I won't do the speech about Open Up to save everyone. Brilliant, thank you. So Open up as a theory of change that it can be quite succinctly summarized. And it's the idea that there exist between both citizens and the state existing processes and existing relationships that could be greatly improved with better access to data and information. And that fundamental to improving active citizenship as well as responsive government is the centering of both innovation design as well as creating tools and increasing the access to data to bring to see to bring those connections or make those connections more productive. But already you start to see in these kinds of I don't think it makes it hugely different to many of the kind of social change um, theories of change that you see in many civil society grant applications. But already you're starting to add layers of complexity to the design process when your theory of change involves so many different kinds of actors and so many, and not just systems, structural systems, but technical systems as well, and processes and products. And you know what I mean? All those all those different levers add a lot of complexity to trying to problem solve in that space. And really I think you should the best way to view civic tech innovation and civic technology production is as a form of problem solving. So if we can go to the next slide. What we've started to think about a little is how in that space some of the normal understandings of user-centered design or impact-centered design might not be sufficient. Or at least some of the situations where maybe it's not about sufficiency, but we created some problem statements which help to demonstrate some of the design the practical complexities to try to introduce design solutions in our context. And so one of them is, for instance, what we call the perverse product. So you can imagine, say, a parliamentary engagement tool. This was a part of a real problem we were trying to solve on our one stage, which has a significantly high user approval rate, but that is used to spam committee hearings with submissions. Now you can already see how there, in spite of the fact that it appears to be the tool people want, that doesn't solve for the social problem, the public participation problem where we as an organization are trying to address, which is, how to improve the capacity of people to effectively publicly participate. Another one might be, for instance, the client conundrum, where you look at a tool developed for municipalities that collects citizen feedback that's been commissioned by the municipality, which we know just trashes the inputs. So, I mean, in part, that's a political question and a question about how we as an organization receive funds, right? Who do we accept funds for? What is considered to be, and all of these you can see kind of address the question as what is an open up project and trying to decide what an open up project might look like. But I do also think that these problems present a design issue. Because in like the client conundrum, what essentially we're trying to grapple with is who are we designing for? Is the user just the person who's going to use the tool? But often the people using the tools will get a kind of social benefit. And sometimes the social benefit won't be seen by the people using the tools. It will be to a broader community. And so in that case, who do you design around? Another possible or sort of what we consider a problem situation is what we call social asymmetry, a tool with a 97% user approval for engaging war counselors that is used to crowdsource foreign-owned shops as part of a local development initiative. So this is actually something that I don't know if the rest of the team know has been raised before in a municipal context as a design solution, and you can already obviously see the kind of social risks embedded in that, and that meets the needs of the user, that meets the needs of the client, but as a social impact organization committed to a whole lot of principles about what we view a positive social context to be, how do we deal with those kinds of challenges? And then the classic one is the product over process, which is where, say, funders commission a tool we realize can be met by training only, and we would not then need to maintain it. I mean, this is quite a common issue in the kind of civic tech space. Is like, if you consider civic technology to actually be not about technology, but be about problem solving, when you've been commissioned to produce a technology product as opposed to not being commissioned to solve a problem, how do you align your design processes with that kind of challenge? So those are our conundrums. I think these conundrums aren't just reflective of the design process. I think these are some high-level challenges in just implementing civic technology in general, but they're worth considering in this context. So, next slide, please. Thanks, John. So, just to contextualize more in the design kind of process, we understand user-centered design as a collection of processes which focus on putting users at the center of product and design and development. And we've traditionally said that this is how we design solutions. And I think there is something very powerful, there's something very politically powerful about centering users in design, particularly when you think about GovTech and civic, other kinds of civic tech. Next slide, please, Jono. But there's also another kind of design philosophy called impact-centered design, which focuses the design process not on the user, but rather on the impact the product will create. Now, there are a lot of people who I'm sure have done a lot more nuanced academic work on this stuff, but we're talking about perspectives from just practically trying to implement these philosophies. User-centered design emerged, in the 70s in the early stages of innovation, and then that moved to the concept of human-centered design. So, which was trying to bring in more social elements into the design process. User-centered design often being a very commercially minded kind of activity. In other words, you just want to meet the needs of the user because it came from a private sector economic context. You want to meet the needs of the user so that they invest in your product commercially. But then, there were moves to recognizing, the social development value of technologies, and then you move to the concept of human-centered design. And then you also have, like I said, in 2019, impact-centered design. But OpenUp is trying to think of a way that we can practically embed a hybrid of the two, to recognize the values that each might have practically. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. And so, this diagram is kind of, essentially what we think that can look like. But what you'll note is, what I think is central to both human-centered design and impact-centered design is a great appreciation that context is very, very important. And as people who build social change technologies, I think we'll all agree that centering context centering environment is fundamental to trying to create a tool or strategy, a strategy that works. But when you consider human-centered design, you're really thinking about user needs and practically responding to behaviors. But when you're thinking of impact, you're a lot more focused on those are more structural issues like the social context, technologies, politics, economics, and measuring impact accordingly. Next slide, please. So one of the ways this very glad JD not in the room because this is very badly screenshotted image of our what we call our project implementation process. And so I think this is kind of interesting because you can have all these philosophies on the kind of change you want to create, the kind of product you want to create, but how you implement that in your project design is also really, really important. And you'll see that, we have quite a considered process, and you'll see at the end there, build and try, evaluate, build and try, evaluate. That kind of reflects, a lot more of those kind of traditional agile development philosophies as being embedded in our process. But you'll also see there in the middle that, user testing is met alongside mapping of the state of the world. And I think that's important because I think, when you're trying to create a project for social impact, which in the end is what a lot of our projects are designed to do, it's important not just to focus on the outcomes, but to ensure that you're creating a project implementation process that can meet those outcomes. That as much thinking work is done about how you're going to practically implement this project as is done on, the targets you'll eventually get to. And I think that has a lot to do with, being the kind of change you want to see in the world, in a corny way, but I think it's important. So next slide, please, Jono. So, sorry. What we've tried to do, so while, I mean, a lot of that stuff's very sort of conceptual, we think this might have very practical implications for how you actually implement and design in a project. Sorry, I'm dying. So we use it to help define our product and project goals, right? If we're thinking about both the user needs as well as the kind of impacts, those obviously create different kinds, but not separate, they're aligned, but different kinds of goals for project attainment. It also provides us, very importantly, and this came up today actually, it can be a way of providing us with criteria for design pivots, for project pivots, and for cull points. So cull points is a notion that we have a kind of not a fail fast culture, but a fail friendly culture in our organization, and I think there do have to be points at which you are very ready to say no more, like that a philosophy isn't working or a strategy isn't working, and assessing that in line with both the user's needs, or the human user, but you know what I mean, human needs as well as the impacts, is a way to establish the criteria for doing that. It also impacts what your measures of success are, obviously, quite realistically. But at the same time, we'll also need you to eventually adjust your tools for how you do your design work. So a lot of user-centered tools, for instance, are traditionally very individually focused, as opposed to like community or socially focused. And if you're worried not just about individual users, but about social and community impacts, you obviously need to think about how you create a storyboard or how you create a user profile to reflect on those more communal and, to my mind, structural elements in designing your solution. And I think in the long term, one of the most interesting things about it is about how it brings to mind a lot more from a lot earlier in the project, risk and what we consider risk to be, and how strongly we design around and conscious of those risks for not just the direct users, but the communities and beneficiaries at large. And I think it also will necessarily impact how we communicate about our projects and those kinds of things. In terms of what we've actually implemented so far in response to this, Johnna, can you go to the final slide? Sorry, this might be longer than I intended. Johnna will also share we actually did like a first working paper on some of these ideas that we started on. But we've also started, practically, we've created our knowledge works as a separate area of our work in order to facilitate some of these ideas. We have Johnna as our UX researcher, for example, which has been a really important development, to bring that kind of thinking into our research and UX work. We've also started to think of knowledge as a particular product of the organization, which is a significant development for us, and we're still playing around with what that means. And one of the very practical things that this results in is lots of meetings, because a truly kind of thinking collaborative approach to design requires lots of meetings. So meetings is part of the work. And I think we've become quite good at that. So that's the presentation. Thanks. Back to you, Jono. Jono?
Oh, sorry, I have been speaking to mute. So apologies for that, everybody. So before we move on to our next activity, I'm just going to repeat what I just said to nobody. Does anyone have any questions for Gabriella on her presentation on what she spoke about, or any thoughts or comments that they would like to just add to the group or that we could discuss as a starting point? We do have 3 rounds of different activities, or 3 activity questions. I'll quickly just run through the topics. So the first ones are about exploring problems. So we like to call ourselves problem explorers rather than solution finders, or where we can't say that we'll find this specific solution to a problem, but what we can find is look at the data and see what problems are causing this situation, what problems are being caused, and how by looking at the data we can see what we can do to try and overcome some of these issues. The next one is solving problems, the next activity, and then finally we will look at understanding the complexity. But yeah, before we move on to the activities, can I just ask if anyone has any questions that we can... I haven't seen anything in... I've got nothing in the Q&A, so if anyone wants to raise their hand or comment, I'm just going to get the Jamboard for us quickly. Cool. I'm going to pop the Jamboard into the link. This is the first Jamboard to activity 1. Can everyone just... Oh, sorry, Sean. Let me see if I can...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, cool. Mine is just going back to that sort of Venn diagram that Gabby had in her presentation. And just, I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but just a lot of thinking around that impact versus kind of human design. And just from experience, obviously you're trying to create impact in the world. But if you don't design the thing in a way that someone either wants to or can use it, you're not going to achieve that impact because no one's going to be using, especially with tools. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of back up what you were saying there and say that I've seen a lot of that and had a lot of experience where, you kind of like, if people would just do X, they'd be much better off. You kind of, that's the impact that you can see people can have if they do certain things, certain steps. But the actually designing it for someone who's either like going to find that tool or process, and then if they're actually able to use it to achieve that impact is kind of a lot more difficult. So I think if you're working with people and organizations that do create a lot of, or their aim is to create social impact, it should be on you to get them to understand how the human-centered design part works of it, and not kind of take that bit for granted.
Yeah.
So that's kind of more a comment than a question.
Thank you for that comment, Sean. I think definitely a lot of relevant things out of there. And I think one of the things that kind of popped out to me there was what's highlighted in the green circles, that context, and how important kind of both of those lean on the context to be even able to understand the humans in which you invariably trying to solve the problem for, as well as the impact that you're trying to cause. Without having a full understanding of that context, I think then the other bubbles that are around the human and the impact, you really would struggle to get a full context and how to kind of design solutions for those issues. Just as an example, without understanding the context and how you want to change that context, it'd be very difficult to understand the behaviors and what behaviors people are having. And then again, the same with their needs, and without understanding the contextual needs, it's very difficult to understand human needs. And then with the social, I think the same thing kind of applies. If you can't understand the current political situation or what's causing the issues within certain areas through kind of researching the context, then planning or trying to problem solve or problem explore becomes very difficult, because a lot of those nuances will get missed. So we can, if there's any more, I can't see currently if there's anything in the Q&As. Caroline, what is defined as balanced in OpenUp's approach? Whose or what balance? Gabrielle, I don't know if you want to answer that.
Sure. Hi, Caroline. Caroline's a friend of the organization. So, yeah, I'm going to do the lawyer answer, which is it depends. Also because, so, I still haven't resigned in my head how these two sort of focuses can work at the same time. Because what's difficult from a kind of a political point of view, and by that I mean an interpersonal power point of view, not like political with a big P, a politics point of view, is appreciating that impact will often be very strongly defined organizationally. So in other words, as my organization, what I consider impact to be is very particular to OpenUp. And at the same time, we're working with communities who are often the users. And so what their needs and values are, balancing, to view those as needing to be balanced has an interesting implication in terms of power. Like, we could say that we focus more on the one than the other, but we have to acknowledge that kind of unequal power distribution in the actual implementation of our project. Do you know what I mean? That we can say we're listening to users, but obviously because we drive the process in that context, in the kind of community project context, I'm not sure that that's honest enough, and that's something to think about as an organization, and to be reflexive on as an organization, as an ethical organization. Although ideally, to my mind, they are balanced, but there's also that's in those more straightforward situations. But then different projects bring different kinds of complexities. Like there are situations where you're working in a conglomerate of organizations. My team don't need to mention it out loud, but I'm thinking of one in particular where the designer, an appreciation of what impact is different. There's a difference between OwnUp's vision and appreciation of what impact looks like, and the project as a whole's vision, because it's involving a number of stakeholders about what impact looks like, and the necessity. And you get this a lot in conversations on political and community organizing, and I don't think we appreciate enough in the technology sector a lot of the how those questions are being resolved in a political context, and how we negotiate what that impact looks like in those contexts in order to achieve the greater good of collaborative projects, is another kind of balancing. And then how to then bring in visions of the user and the user needs, which also might conflict between our perspective on what that is and what our project partners view what that is. That's a whole other kind of balancing exercise that's really interesting. And so I think part of it is appreciating power in project implementation, which is a very oversimplified answer, but was just something I was thinking of now, if that makes sense.
Cool, thanks for that, Gabby. Has everyone had an opportunity? Oh, sorry, Caroline, I see you put another measuring user, citizen, different types, and government priorities, and getting, I think I can share this on the, oh no, sorry, it wasn't the Q&A, so I can't share it. I'll just read, like it's in the, I'm reading straight from the comments. Measuring user, citizen, different types, and government priorities, and getting that balance is challenging and requires nurtured negotiation. And yeah, I think that's it. That's definitely something that we all experience in this space, is how to go about having that conversation, and the kind of definitely nurtures a good word for that, I think. Oh, there we go. It is up on the chat. I don't know if anyone else has anything to comment on top of on that. Just raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll go back to the activity. Is everyone able to access the Jamboard? Let's have a look, see if I can see. I can see some people are starting to get onto the Jamboard now. So the way the Jamboard works is we've got the different questions at the top. In the middle, you'll see 1 of 5. You can just click the right arrow and go through the questions. So we'll start at question number 1, and then we can just, so below, if you look on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see an arrow. And
can we just check if Caroline's having trouble accessing the Jamboard?
Oh, sure. Let me just quickly try and
change the settings.
Sorry, yeah, sorry about that, Caroline. It should be working now. Just let me know. Still not. Caroline, is it still not working on your side? Okay, I see there's a request to share, so I'll just do it from that way.
Right, it works now.
Okay, cool,
Cool,
perfect.
Thanks.
So yeah, I think just because we're a small group, we originally thought we'd break up into groups and then join the plenary once again, and then just kind of discuss what the different groups came up with. Because we're such a small group, I think it'll be best if we can just all add to the Jamboard from this. Feel free to raise your hand at any time if you want to discuss something that you see on the Jamboard. But I'll give us all 5 minutes, and then we can just 5 to 8 minutes, and we can just add some things, and then we'll come back and discuss the first question. So yeah, I think what will work is let's do 5 minutes for each question, and then we'll just go one by one and discuss them. So yeah, for the first question, what are your organization's problems with designing for change, and how would you describe them? And also, just for this question, it doesn't have to be an overall kind of picture of your organization. You can specifically talk about a product or a specific project that's bringing that you're experiencing some of these problems in designing for change. Are people adding to the Jamboard on the questions? I just don't see any. I don't see any movements. I'm not sure if it's my side. Oh, there we go. Cool. I think I'll start discussing some of what's been put up on the board. Thanks for everyone that's put up some suggestions. So I see Gabriella said politics, the big P, that always comes up with these kind of issues. Gab, I don't know if you want to speak to that more.
Yeah, I mean, it's just as Caroline gently reminded me about GovTech projects in particular, as a particular aspect of civic technology projects. You know, you just have So very little control of political priorities in government, and so little influence on those priorities. Well, technically, you have so little influence on those priorities. So there are many backdoors to changing that. But that's, just it's challenging to design in that context. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Gabby. And then I see Sean said users. Quick and easy access to user feedback for new tools. That is that no one uses or knows about yet. Difficult to get critical mass on experimental new tools. Sean, I don't know if you want to speak to that. I think I. Oh, sorry, Sean. Can you just raise your hand and then we can unmute you that way? So it has to be through hand raising and then we can unmute. Awesome, thanks.
That's very civilized that it makes you put your hand up first before you can talk.
That's how we do.
Yeah, so I mean, let's say you've got an established tool or website or whatever, then you've got lots of people using it, and then you make changes and you can get nice feedback. But a lot of the stuff, especially in the beginning, is very experimental. No one knows about it, and so it's very difficult, to get enough of the right people responding to and legitimate users. Not just, I mean, you can get like proxy users, which is often what we do, just so that we can get quick feedback. And there's nothing wrong with kind of using those proxy users, but at some stage you need to find a way to get your target users using it and giving you real feedback, so that you can make sure either that what you're building actually achieves the impact that you want for the people who are going to be using it, or then you can kind of pivot away if it's not really doing what it needs to do.
Yeah, and definitely I've experienced this quite a lot in terms of doing UX research, especially when we've on our more experimental products, where we're taking wireframes to these people that we user testing with, and they kind of get an idea of the problem that we're trying to solve and the way that we're trying to solve it. So I've found it's very difficult to get feedback once this process has already taken place, because generally, if it's a new piece of technology that doesn't exist, everyone's kind of for it and they say, yeah, it's going to be great. We don't have this before, but kind of missing the idea that technology doesn't always create a community. Even if that's what the intention of the tool is, it doesn't do that automatically. So how do we, from your experience with this, what do you normally do for this, Sean?
Struggle, but like I said, go try to get from proxy user to real users through a number of different kind of ways. Sometimes it's going through organizations who have access to who your target audience is, finding people online, finding people we've worked with before, and then also sometimes kind of even reimbursing people for the time it takes, because it can take kind of like 2 hours to give a whole bunch of feedback. So I would say those are the things that we try the most, with varying degrees of success. I mean, what would be amazing is if you could just have like 10 of your target audience sitting in a room giving you 2 hours when you need it. But actually just finding those people and getting them in at the right time is very difficult. And I think also what we really struggled with was going through kind of COVID lockdowns for 2 years, which made it very difficult to kind of sit with people and kind of take them through those kinds of things. And I don't know if we've got back to the same levels of engagement face to face that we had before COVID happened.
Yeah. And in terms of the kind of feedback that you're getting from your users, have you found that when you are able to engage with the users, that they would comment on the usefulness of the tool, or what is your experience with that kind of user feedback that you get? Is it generally very helpful, or is there kind of things that you would like to hear more back from your users that's missing?
Yes, so I think you need to ask good questions of your kind of user testers, and I think that's both a skill and an art, and also something you learn over time. So I would say not always. Often you don't get the kind of answers that you want. They want to go straight to the solution and don't quite see how that can be done through a tool. And I think it's also your job as the researcher or the product owner or whatever to kind of interpret what they're saying and turn that into something technical that you can change. So I think it's really about asking good questions, but then also about really listening and trying to understand what they're trying to say and their feedback, because it's probably not going to be delivered in the way that you want it to.
And I think there, just in what you've said there, there's kind of a grappling between the people and the impact. There is understanding the people and what their needs are, but also invariably how that will lead, or how implementing something for those people will lead to an impact. Thanks, Sean, for those comments. I see there's measuring change. I think, Adam, was that you that put that up? Would you like to speak about that from your experience? Oh, sorry, Adam. You need to raise your hand if you do want to comment. Okay, that's fine. Also, I'm happy to. I can also speak to that. I think measuring change is definitely something that. Oh, sorry, Adam. You here? Awesome.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. Okay. This is a complicated system, isn't it? Sorry, I got slightly distracted. Yeah, sorry. Just keeping it very short. I think one thing that obviously I think is always a challenge at the beginning of a project is kind of understanding how to map output metrics to outcome metrics, and have an idea of what it is you're trying to measure, or what change it is you're trying to affect. And then I think where I see a lot of projects that I've been involved with, and not necessarily with the current organisation, struggle is in terms of constantly re-evaluating those relationships. So quite often we start out on a project, we have an idea of the way the mechanisms to affect change might work, and then we never really go back and discuss the actual evidence once it starts to become evident. And usually that I think often that's often to do with the fact that it's quite easy to once you get started on a project, once you get bogged down in the details, once you start working on partner relationships and all of that kind of thing, it's quite easy, surprisingly easy, to actually take your eye off the ball and forget what the big change you're trying to affect is when you're bogged down in the day-to-day of running a project and developing code and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think enough projects across the board really engage in that reevaluation and reassessment of the connections there. Present can be accepted, of course.
Thanks for that, Adam. And do you think that has to do with strategy in terms of changing the strategy of how they're reviewing these metrics? Or is that, would you say that it's in terms of project planning, or when they were using methodology to set up the project plan, that those metrics weren't clearly laid out, or how in future change would be measured throughout the project's lifespan?
I think it's quite simply that it is the easiest conversation not to have, if that makes sense. that that the very big picture evaluation stuff just tends to get shunted down, kicked down the field. Maybe happens once a year, isn't part of the regular assessments of progress and goal setting because it's so hard to measure. We can't. It's essentially you cannot measure a single project's impact on long-term change in most of the areas that we want to affect. So we tend to just not have the conversation, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think a good example of that, those you don't know, we have the evictions project, which is a digital evictions guide. I just think it's a good example which kind of highlights something in terms of measuring this change. And not to say that we're not looking at these metrics over time, because we definitely do. But we just find that when it comes to measuring this change or measuring the actual impact, that it's quite difficult. Although we've seen like a huge increase in numbers of people that are coming to the eviction guide, and therefore seeing that the tool is definitely being used and necessary in the eviction space. What we do find is very difficult to see exactly what people are using the tool for. We can see page visits and where people are going or leaving the site, but we can't really see what they've done with that information after that. And I think something that Adam said after this is that next step takes a lot more work and a lot more planning, whether it's now going to court and getting data straight from court and then being able to comparatively look at that with the data that we have from the site. I think that that's something that is almost becomes a project on its own. And then when projects go on, we either don't have capacity, time, personnel, or just it becomes complicated to try and see whether these or try and measure these impacts. So yeah, thank you for that comment, Adam.
And also,
I just wanted. Oh,
Adam
sorry,
first, then Gabriella.
sorry, John. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to jump into the conversation. So the other thing I think that is an issue here as well is also that it's not something funders are anywhere near as good at as they pretend to be. And ultimately, there is a responsibility on a funded project that the funders should be engaging in that high level goal setting. And I find quite often they'll just take any old numbers you throw at them and accept them as being impact numbers and not really interrogate them because ultimately, they've funded the project got done, their bosses are happy, and they're not looking at the right. They're kind of they're better at talking the talk around impact now, but I'm not sure there's been a lot of change in terms of actually walking.
Thanks for that point, Adam. I think that's a really good point that there's a lot more people to the project than just the implementing team, whether that's funders or, as Gabriella mentioned earlier, with politicians, and where they see different projects. So yeah, definitely a good point there, Adam. Gabriella, I think you had something that you wanted to say earlier.
yeah, it was just linked to what Adam was saying, and it's just like the two kinds of complexities I think added into that. The one is that a lot of the language and the concept around metrics and also the language and concepts that emerge from user-centered design and what metrics are, of course, are embedded in an economic model, an individualized economic model that is not of interest to us. You know what I mean? So, number of users to a site is, important when your business case is an advertising model, but it's not important when your business case is changing lives, and that do I want 500,000 people visiting my site, or do I want one person who uses the site and manages to retain, their position in their home? So the approach to metrics in technology is something that needs to be reimagined. Quite strongly. And again, also like Anna mentioned, part of that is the difficulty of that. Like what is the method for gathering information about that metric, except to do long form, considered panel studies on on a couple of users' lives over the next 10 years. You know what I mean? It's so there's that. And yeah, actually I'll just stop there. That's fine.
Thanks, Gabby, for those comments. And I think that also just highlights the importance of workshops like this, where we can get together and really discuss these in this kind of a context. I'm going to move on to the next one just to keep time, and I think that's a perfect time to mention, because that is what the card is about: time to learn and change, and understand of more time needed by external individuals, usually researchers, in understanding internal community dynamics. Gabby, is that your card? Oh, you're just clicking it. I'm not sure who, Caroline, was it you that put that sticky note on regarding time? If it was and you want to speak more to it, just raise your hand and then we can add you to the speaker as a speaker.
Hello?
Hi, Caroline, we can hear you.
Oh, talk about user experience design. Amy needs some feedback. The time to learn. Obviously, most of our projects are funded, so there's a challenge of time. And what we've discovered, that when you're working with people that are not too familiar with using technology to report an issue or to engage in civic tech or citizen engagement, you need to go through a process of onboarding, right? Probably that's the right word to use. Onboarding, guidance, and integration in existing programs that are happening, in the communities. It's very, very challenging. And the closer that the program is to the community, the better it is, rather than a very national kind of project where we'll assume every community is the same, and it's not the case. So if you have an Eastern Cape rural town and you have Gauteng, a town in Gauteng, your office is going to be like Johannesburg. It's very different. And then Johannesburg also has its other layers and so on and so forth. So having that time to learn and to engage the users is really important, especially from the citizen side, but also from the government side, because they have a lot of suspicions when it comes to such projects. And building on that, I think I would tie that in with the other sticky note I put in about inclusive. What did I say? Inclusive design. Typically, we are always speaking to government and our NGOs, but we don't really kind of go deeper and speak to the people that really need to have an impact from this project in the first place. I'll take, for example, the project close to open up, like Vuleka Mali. Very familiar with that one. Great project, and engaging with civil society and so on and so forth. But I remember there was a time, maybe it's changed now, but there was a user persona report which I used. Actually, it was very interesting to find out the user personas, and I noticed that most of the personas were targeted at skilled people who were able to engage with the data on the platform. And obviously you have to have a certain level of knowledge around it, but then we need to ask ourselves the question, who are we really targeting in the first place, and have we reached that target? So if we have Vuleka Mali that has access to open data, how have we interpreted that for the typical layman citizen who desperately needs that data to hold their local government accountable? So do we need to now start incorporating other platforms? How do we do that? And then when we do that, how do we include them in designing those platforms so that they're accessible to them, to get the impact that they want. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
No, thank you. I think also a whole lot of great things came out of that. And I think it also leads me back to kind of what Sean was saying earlier. In terms of trying to access these different users, that can often be an issue, or an issue that I've experienced is actually, where do we find these users now when there's not an existing tool that everyone's using? And invariably, technology is a really nice way to build out a database of people that are using a specific tool. But if that's not existing, I found it quite difficult and time consuming to try and reach out to these people, and get them to explain what they would like, what they envision for that space. Yeah. So thank you for
the,
that.
the what we notice is working with, and I saw something about program design versus product design. Was that, I think, one of the slides, program design. So working with an existing program, I think it's very different when you're looking at a commercial product versus a civic tech
Yeah.
project or product. You have to work with an existing program, and that really, that's what we found helped us to actually, tie in with finding those key users at different levels. So that's what I would advise people leverage off when working with such programs or projects.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's also a perfect time. For keeping time in mind, I think we should skip the next question. Do you disagree that any of the certain conundrums implicate design? And move over to, what do you think the key differences between product design and program design? And then, how do we manage these differences? So I think if we could all fill out our answers on the fourth question. So, but we can use the first one as the leader or the guiding question to that. Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're pinning to slide 4.
Yeah, we'll pin straight to slide 4.
Okay.
And then
Cool.
maybe I'll just dive into the comments so long, and then people can just fill out as we go. Just trying to keep mindful of time and see that we can get through as many of the Jamboard questions as we can. I'm going to start with your comment, Caroline. So I don't know if you want to raise your hand and speak to it again. That would be great, but I'll read it out loud for everyone's benefit. To find that program intervention, piggyback off it. We never work alone in civic tech. So that's how do we manage the difference between programs and products?
So I was reading that question and I said, how do you, with what tools? I'd actually mainly answered the first, but how do you manage these differences? But I mean, tools, I mean, what exactly do you mean by tools? Before I answer before I elaborate on my comment.
So I think for me, one of the tools would be a data collection tool to understand whether we're collecting data from our product or from our tool, and then applying it to our program. Would be that, whether it's a feedback, I think a feedback form, a Google form could be one of those tools. Google Analytics being another one. That's how I understood it as the tools.
Oh, so you're okay. Okay, so like data collection tools. Okay.
But I'm happy if
Um,
you do. Oh, sorry. I'm happy if you just want to speak to what you put on the comments there, because I did say that we can join these two questions together. So yeah, if you do want to, you can speak to it. However, whatever best for you.
I think, building on what I had said earlier with program versus product design, with program design, probably being more holistic in understanding that you're not an isolated intervention or an isolated, even sometimes not even an isolated product, because there are other products that are there. But what are you working towards? That the theory of change you were mentioning before, and the best way we have worked with our two projects was to sort of build on an existing intervention. We experienced working alone, and that failed dismally. But then when we started working with existing programs or existing interventions in a community or town, we found that it was so much more effective because these programs already had these partnerships that existed in different countries and communities. And they'd already built a relationship between citizens and government. And working on what they were trying to achieve was actually really successful in that sense. And you're looking at the tools. Well, I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm biased in that sense because but I do also believe that quantitative data is valuable, although I feel that it's more just a supportive tool than the actual tool that gives you the clear picture of what is actually happening around you. Your quantitative tools, like your surveys, your metrics, that those analytics, those are valuable. But I also think that you need to probably start with the qualitative to understand who are you dealing with, what is the kind of person like, what are their challenges or their daily experiences, to get a clear picture of what you should really be looking for in the data. And that's why I spoke about discovery metrics. And I don't know if that even I'm not sure if that exists, but I was trying to articulate what I was well, the meaning behind it was what we did is we have collected data in our tool, Mobi Surface, and over time we've seen some interesting things coming up. And this is based on what we originally understood as what people needed in the communities. What do they need to report in relation to an issue they're experiencing? And who are the people involved? And through that, we then went back to the data, the quantitative data, and then made some discoveries along the way by experimenting with a variety of questions and values we're trying to get from the data. So with civic tech, it's so uncertain, especially with the politics. My goodness, the politics, the resistance, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, if you try and present a sort of like a proposal to government, say you've been doing this and you've been doing that, look what we found about what has been happening, then you get that new kind of engagement. You almost need to convince them. Yeah, so it's I hope I made it. I said a lot of things, yeah, but yeah, that's my nutshell.
No, thank you so much for those comments. I think one of the things that really stood out for me was finding these partners, but not only partners to work as industry experts, but because of their kind of very valuable ties to users or people that firstly understand the problem or the situation that they live in, but also that are willing to make that change. I think something we experience a lot, especially when leaning on our partners too much, is kind of the lack of assistance that we get with content creation from their side. And I think that that's something that can really be overcome by talking with users and working with direct target audience or target population, because they have that information themselves, and a lot of them I think would be very willing to kind of work on these projects because of their experience themselves. Whereas partners may be removed from the situation themselves, although that's their field of expertise, they might not be going through it themselves or not have that drive to be forefront on that content creation. So thank you for those points, Caroline. Appreciate that. Gabby, we're going to move over to your one. Stakeholder management, a bigger necessary component for program design. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much similar to what Caroline was saying. That you're a lot less when you the program design is the overarching design to the product design, and also is also one of the things that makes us so different from a private sector, pursuit of a product, an individual product, but that stakeholder management comes with a lot more complexity than just like user and client. That you're trying to create a product in an ecosystem, and so at the same time trying to create a facilitating ecosystem for that product is part of our job and our design work, which is very different from commercial projects, and very difficult. It's 90% of the work, I think. And that, yeah. I mean, I also wanted to flag, or maybe I should just, but Caroline, if you have anything on any work you guys have done on the idea of the discovery metrics, I'd love to see it, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, there's a book chapter coming out. I'm not sure if it's end of this year. We're almost end of this year, but I will share it with you, Gabriella.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Jono's muted. Look.
I was just testing all you guys lip syncing, reading. I mean, I was lip syncing, and yeah. So what I did say was we're moving on to activity 2, problem solving. Gabby showed a good example of how to solve a problem there by telling me to unmute myself. And so our first question that we're going to grapple with is, what are some of the key methodologies your organization uses in the design process? Some of the ones that we have spoken is our human design methodology, and then also our theory of change that we use. But we'd really like to hear from other project teams or other projects, what are some of your key methodologies that you use? So let me just share before we do move on, let me share the Jamboard for this. Cool. Everyone should have access to the Jamboard. Should be able to use it now. And you can start filling out your cards as soon as you're able to log in. That's a marvelous matrix. So yeah, some of the things that we've that have come up: strategy formulation. Caroline, is that you that put that sticky notes up?
Yeah, but I was hoping you wouldn't choose me first.
I'm sorry. I can choose myself up in the
Okay,
top right corner and speak about user-centered design.
great.
So yeah, I think there's so much to speak about user-centered design. I could actually be here all night, but I think for me, it kind of happens along project timelines, which is quite an interesting part of it. In terms of like in the inception of a product or project, understanding really from the user's perspective, we normally engage with stakeholders or our partners in the project. Firstly, who kind of give us an understanding of our users, and we start forming user personas from there, and then can go into the next step of researching and understanding exactly what they want. But for us, I think we definitely always center, or a lot of our projects where we're able to, or the project allows us the capacity to do that, we do try and center the development of our tools around our users or the people who will be engaging with the tool the most. And yeah, I think from the kind of UX perspective, I've seen the tools where we really are able to grapple with these users up front and discuss these points and really nail down what the best way is going to do all the projects or the products that users use the most. And that's because a lot of their design, a lot of what they achieve has come directly from users and not someone else's kind of perception or understanding of what the user does need. So I'm going to go down to Gabriella's matrix that she's posted. If you want to speak to a bit about that, I think that came out of a conversation. We can be completely transparent about it, and that came out of a conversation that we had today. On the human-centered approach and how to differentiate between the different elements of feedback and how to kind of understand them from a importance metric or importance scale. But I'll let you speak to it, Gabriella.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I may as well, use this as an opportunity, to throw out spitball on stuff, we're currently dealing with. Because I think there's I love it when we make this stuff incredibly practical. And a good way of thinking about, this kind of conceptual thing we seem to be discussing is that so we'll do user research and we'll do user feedback, and we'll have, say, a bullet list of 10 kinds of user feedback on a product. Okay. Let's say one of them, it has sticky keys. The other one is, so you have this list of 10 recommendations. And we were just discussing, how do you prioritize those recommendations in the next phase of your design process? And that surely that requires you to think of quite a few things. Sure, one of the things is to think about what is practical and what will take the least amount of time. But another thing to think about is what will create the most impact for you and your project, and balance that with what will create the most impact for the user. Because sometimes, there are considerable difference to user experience from a single change that might not influence the long-term impact of the project, but has an immediate need for a user. You might think of, for instance, something like anyway, I won't think of an example. And at the same time, also balance that against the very practical issues of how much capacity, what capacity do you have tomorrow? I have 2 researchers working tomorrow, but my developer is only available next month. That, as much as we pretend that's not how we make decisions, that is how we make decisions. And so thinking about, just a fun way of thinking about how you implement that in a project. Do you use a tool? And then again, is it just about being conscious of those things? Because do you at every point use this complex decision making tool. Practically not really. It's just something you often you do on instinct. Yeah, that was what we were talking about today.
Yeah, and I think as an example, a practical way that this often plays out, I see it between our kind of project managers and product owners, where they're grappling over this understanding of what's needed, and they're taking a lot of perspectives. I think from a product owner perspective, they often want to meet the client's needs. And I mean, I'm not a product owner myself, so I don't want to speak too much about what a product owner does kind of think when they go into those things. But a project manager has a lot of different kind of nuances that they're trying to take in, whether it's the funding, whether it's the accessibility to the different team members, team member capacities. And they must really understand at which point capacity can help us meet that minimum viable project, the MVP, the fastest and in the most successful way. Whereas I think the role of the product owner is a bit different. As a visionary or as somebody who's really pushing for change within that field, or that's the idea of what a product owner should be thinking about. Those kind of metrics of capacity and finances might not be on the foreground of their thinking. Of course, it's definitely something that they would discuss with the project manager throughout and have oversight and understanding over that. But I think it's just very interesting how important it is that we have these different team members looking after these different, I want to say, looking over these different things or managing these different elements. And then again, I think a researcher comes with their own understanding of what's the most valuable things in the project. And that can come, I mean, generally that should come or does in the kind of research that we do directly from the users. So when we're feeding back from that context, or maybe from a desktop research context, depending on what kind of project we're working on. And then I think, again, looking from a developer perspective, they would have their own understanding of what the best way to kind of solve a problem would be. So it's really being able to find that middle ground between the way in which we all see that a solution could be, that we could come to a solution, but then also in the really relevant user's situation, would that still work? Or are we too removed and have to go back and look at our research to try and kind of work that out further? Caroline, are you ready for me to pass over to you? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot a lot.
It's all right. It is very interesting to hear from the industry perspective, because I know there's always this thing about, the academics and the industry people. The academics want to take forever just to understand something, and they're all after papers. But it's not true. We actually do want to solve problems. We do want to solve problems. We're the kind of individual that an industry is not really wanting to work with, because we take our time, and for good reason sometimes. So with these techniques, and my focus on civic tech, or some technology for social good, it does take time. But one of the key things, well, the techniques that we try to do is really making sure we frame the problem and understand the problem, and give ourselves time to learn along the journey of the product's development and use. So I'll start with the strategy formulation part, and I think that's something maybe you'd have maybe like top management dealing with. But the UX researcher, the UX designer, user researcher needs to actually get really involved in the whole strategy formulation around the program, not just the product, because then they start getting a holistic view on what problem are you really dealing with, or you trying to address, what are the existing strengths, weaknesses, and from there you're starting to identify those key needs, those key challenges that are trying to be solved. And that's how we do it with the strategy formulation process, including all key stakeholders, but some users as well. And then the comprehensive evaluation approach to UX design or user research is having a particular approach you apply throughout the development of the product. Was that a violin?
No, it's the train.
Okay. Okay. So having a particular evaluation approach throughout the development of the product and post the implementation of the product. So our comprehensive evaluation approach looks like at the baseline study, through to the needs assessment, through to the program theory development, then what was the other one? What is it? Oh, process assessment, outcome assessment, impact assessment. And it seems like a long process, yes, but it is really valuable. And it's just about interpreting how it would work for your product development and using particular methodologies throughout the product's development to evaluate and make a contribution and change. So that I hope I'm making sense with my methodology. But if you are not familiar with program um, evaluation, it actually ties in really well. The comprehensive evaluation approach really ties in with program evaluation. And now here we're talking about program design, right? Yeah. So with the program evaluation approach, which is comprehensive throughout the product's development, this becomes essential. Defining what that means in terms of how you actually apply your user research or your UX research or your design, that would depend on how your organization functions in designing the product. I hope I made sense.
No, completely, definitely did. And I'm gonna go back and have a look at more comprehensive evaluation approaches and see how that can tie in, especially when we're looking at our metrics of projects after inception. I think there's a lot of value there. Um, and then again, what you said, I think we do need our academics to help us with that kind of in some ways. I guess it is long-winded research, but then on the ground, having that research done up front is the reason why we can do the work at the speed that we do it. So I think, yeah, I don't see a world where we can have these on the ground projects without the academics that have kind of given us some building blocks to work with. And thank you very much for that feedback.
Pleasure.
Oh, sorry, I actually did want to ask one thing. And with these kind of strategies that you're implementing, do you pick and choose different methodologies that are in these based on the project itself? Do you look at the needs and then use different elements of this, or these kind of holistic strategies that you can kind of overlay over most projects and programs?
Well, you see, our research is really continuous. So we kind of identify we first look at what are the gaps that we're trying to address. So in understanding the user and understanding the context. Because I think I don't know where I made a comment, but what we've noticed is other processes that we incorporate, such as strategy formulation, it is like research as well. We have user feedback that kind of just unfolds organically. It just comes out of nowhere. Then when you then you stand back and ask yourself, okay, where are the gaps? What am I still trying to understand? What is already existing there? And I noticed with a lot of UX research, well, I won't say a lot, I'll say some UX researchers or designers I've worked with, they don't really do a literature review, and there's so much literature on research that has already been done on the very same topic. And people are not really going back to the literature. They just go straight into the field and try and guesswork who the user would be and how to engage with them. But there's a lot of literature out there about engaging with different types of users. And it doesn't have to be technology or related literature. It's also about the program you're working with. If you're going to be working with sensitive youth on reporting on very sensitive work, how do you engage with them effectively? So going back to the literature and then trying to identify what do I still need to answer around who my users are, and what is the literature telling me that I need to investigate more about, that kind of thing. Yeah. You're muted.
Thank you so much. Before I started on another tangent there, I think that kind of ties us into our metrics as back to the metrics that Gabby was speaking about. Is how do we put value on those different pieces of information? How do we understand them differently to one another, and where to focus our attention? Where to focus that user feedback that we're getting? Is it on the development of this tool to make it better, more user friendly for the users to use? or are we trying to focus on understanding the impact and which parts of the product we can grow in that way? So I think it's just important that we're able to use different tools to understand and visualize that feedback in different ways that are usable in different ways, and to understand that feedback isn't only kind of usable on a singular spectrum, but one piece of feedback or one piece of feedback data can be usable along a lot of different things. We can learn a lot about a project or a product from one piece of feedback. So I think we can move on to, should we answer how does designing within a methodological framework, help you? It's been a long day. That is, that's question number 3. So if we want to answer the third question. These two, the questions are different on the Jamboard than is than what we've got on the screen here. So I'm gonna ask us. Let's just answer the question. On the Jamboard. So how can civic technology technology engage both agency, individual capacity, and structure external constraints to action? So that's the third question on the Jamboard that I've shared.
Oh, that's a fun question. And then should we actually probably end on that one? I don't think we're going to get through all the other questions here, John, but maybe we end on that one.
I think that's a good.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
So over to you, Carol. Just joking. So if everyone wants to take time, just add some sticky notes to the board, and then we can discuss them.
Can you maybe just elaborate on this a bit more? I'm seeing too many words here. I know I'm academic, but still, how can civic tech engage with both agency and structure? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, this is stuff that comes from my brain, which is part of the problem, right? It's part of the problem of having the heart of a researcher with the brain of a lawyer and trying to reconcile those in an implementation context. It's exhausting. But one of the things that is interesting to me, and this is highly just my perspective, I feel like you see in the way that we imagine technology, because so much of how we imagine technology is born of how technology has been imagined in a commercial context, like an economic context. So like developing a technology product to get it sold. That often, so you see this very individualized approach to how we imagine the user. So for instance, you'll see like on a user profile, it has stuff on like your ability to use technology, right? So how able are you to use a certain, like how digitally literate are you? And we'll often also have like preferences, like things like what are your preferred means of doing things, and that's so different from trying to think about what the structural impediments to acting in a context are, so like if you're in a community that's if you're in a poor community, you're a young person in a poor community who hasn't, any ET youth, right? So you don't have access to work, have been working in 6 years or whatever. Trying to think about that kind of person without like as a user, you know, who has preferences for like using an application in a certain way without addressing the structural impediments to them acting in that context is difficult. So I suppose, how do I make that? I don't know how I make this point simpler, because I haven't thought it through very well. So sorry, but you know, I feel like a lot of the design process sort of behaves like the only thing that is stopping people from taking action is, you know, like are individualized things like, well, I haven't found the right app, or I haven't found, you know, I just haven't gone, I haven't seen, I haven't had access to the information. I mean, that's part of it. But how do you design in a context where actually, of course, there are big structural reasons why you can't take action on things? This is a very badly. Does that make sense?
Yes, to me, yes. It's deep. But yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and I just suppose we can even, you know, even if we can't put it on the jam board, because I mean, I don't know if there's post-its that solve this problem, but you know, like just thinking about how civic technology imagines itself in that context. Do we then always limit ourselves to just being, yeah, how do we imagine our role then in that context? Like, because I think it touches on something that is maybe uncomfortable in the civic tech community, or at least has been uncomfortable for us as an organization. So I can like be totally honest here, maybe, is like, you know, when you see in our theory of change that we see ourselves, like, because we're working with largely technology or innovative thinking, we see our role as, we pretend like our role is neutral, and that, you know, we'll just deliver this thing and that will make the process, you know, as far as possible, improve the relationship between government and citizens. That's cool, but of course there are giant structural impediments to doing that, including politics, right? So then what do we imagine our role is in like lobbying for bigger kinds of social change without using the word lobbying and without saying we're lobbyists, you know? Because of course, for like us as an organization, so much of the reason why we are in the room with, say, Treasury, or the room with our other government partners, is because they don't see us as political activists. They see us as technologists, you know? And so how do you negotiate that when what you want to do is create social change? And that necessitates, we know the reality of what that means. That might be
Yeah,
too big.
it's a very layered thought. But maybe if I give an example of our experience with Mobi Surface, which is for providing the youth with the platform to report and access to sexual reproductive health services. And we work through like champions in case that there's a youth member that's not aware of the platform and they don't know how to do it. So we have like youth champions in the communities. But what we also discovered is that the youth are just relying on champions a lot, and they're kind of afraid to use the platform itself. And you know, how come so one would say, okay, it's probably data, they don't have enough data, but then they have enough data to go on Facebook, you know, or Twitter, or you know, other platforms. So there are other things that we haven't really discovered about the particular user and kind of done an in-depth study to understand what do they want, what do they need, do they really want to look at all that information that's on on the actual application, you know, do they just are they lazy to go through the process of submitting a report? There are other things, but at the same time, they're also very diverse users, and they have their own way of engaging with the local clinics on reporting an issue that they feel safer to do. Maybe they find that it's just that's the way we always do things. We report through another individual. We don't go directly because we're not old enough. So there are many factors that need to be considered and questioned when we're kind of going a bit deeper to understand what they need. But we only found this out after the implementation of the application. And we are now at a stage where we have to rediscover the user or users with a very open mind because they have now gone and categorized themselves in terms of what their roles are. And they want those roles to be amplified and seen as essential in the program itself because at the moment they're not seen as vital and essential. The champions were seen as temporary users that would kind of disappear when the other youth users or directly report an issue. But then the champions have become really vital to the program. So, understanding those roles, redefining their roles, designing the application specifically for that particular role, and also trying to triangulate our data collection to discover much, much, much more. Um, because we have used particular approaches and maybe they haven't really given us the answers we need sufficiently. And maybe we need to kind of expand our sample population and who we're speaking to. But some of these things, like I said, it's like rediscovering the user. They only come out once the application is being used, has done a bit of its own good and dirty work in the community, and then these things unfold. So I don't know if I'm actually addressing your question slash comment slash um thing, but I also find it very challenging that we are seen as the technologists, and we have been
Mm.
excluded from certain meetings as well, which I complained about from the program, the NGO program, because they see us as just the people that implement the technology. But I tell them, well, we don't understand who you're working with. How are we going to implement it if we don't understand the users? And then it gets implemented, and then some of the users, which happen to be branch members from, or NGO branch members from other countries, say, no, but we can't use that in this country because it doesn't work like that. This is how it works. So you see the
Yeah.
problems that are starting to unfold because of how they view us in the whole
Mm.
setting of the program itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and that links back to something you said earlier, which is something we really experience. That there's so, and I was complaining about it the other day too. There's still so much conscientizing to do with not just government, but certainly government, and with civil society, who we often use as a proxy to get to, users and communities because we don't have our own users and communities for a lot of reasons, about what the role of innovation is and how good innovation works. You know, that we're not service provider. We can't just be service providers. That's not how you design a winning social change tool, Um, and that's actually, like, when we were talking about stakeholder management earlier, that's actually a lot of that is how do you actually that kind of conscientizing of the process is a lot of that's actually a lot of the work. And that thing you were talking about with the kind of using proxies, that the community itself starts to elect to use proxies, is something I've also seen in a lot of the stuff we've done, um, and in different, like more traditional, like when I was a more traditional civil society thing. And it's funny, yeah, because how do you deal? And it does link to the structural thing that, like, the language of active citizenship, which is one we use because it's very positive, like, we can get you to be an active citizen or whatever, has a very, and that's kind of, I think, what I'm kind of trying to get to is embedded in it is this kind of very individualized Western perspective of how active a person can be. Like, if I just gave someone an app to report potholes, then they'd report potholes, and if they don't, it's because they don't care about their community. You know what I mean? And it often, like, fails to appreciate the cost of public participation for people who have big, big problems. You know, bigger problems sometimes than, yes, ultimately they might be met by more public participation, but when I need to get food on my family's table tomorrow, it's actually a huge thing to ask of them, to be an active citizen today, you know? And I suppose all we can do is just be conscious of that. It doesn't need to be, but it's just something that's interesting to me because I don't hear it come up in these kinds of civic tech conversations a lot. And I think that's because then most of them are not being driven by our kinds of contexts.
Yeah. Oh, I thought I saw Adam there. Okay. Yeah, I agree with you, Gabriella. It's just I'm just wondering how we work around these challenges and these complexities. I mean, I suppose this is the right space to even start talking about this because I've never really heard of anyone talking about design and using UX design or even the experiences of us as innovators in the space. Um, so I don't know. I mean, like, where to from here?
I liked what you said in your previous, when you were speaking earlier about reevaluating users, and especially once the product is kind of being delivered. And also it ties back to, I think, what Adam was saying earlier, that needs to be kind of baked into the methodology of the project from the beginning, understanding that we have these metrics that may change as the product grows, but also that we have users that change and that our previously kind of defined user personas may have changed, either because we've now learned about new users that we didn't know about before, which I think that's just one part of it, but also that our users themselves may have changed because of the product, the implementation of the product, like what you were saying with the community champions. Those users have actually changed into different user roles. And
Yeah.
when you were speaking about yours, the kind of evictions project came to mind again, as an online kind of guide for people to use their own agency and try and fight their eviction with the information and step-by-step guide and links to kind of resources that they can use. We get a lot of feedback of people that are reaching out for human support. And I think that tied in quite nicely to what you were saying, especially with the champions, that even if it's difficult to define what is causing people to not be able to take on the agency to do that themselves. Whether it's that they don't feel confidence in their skills, whether it's that they feel that they are more likely to get what they want if they reach a human. So yeah, I think there is really a lot of different reasons why people do seek that assistance or human assistance, but also a lot of research and a lot of work that can be done is in the civic tech space to see what kind of technology we can implement that is going to give people that sense of having human contact without having the extreme capacity and costs that a human like that it takes to have a human in that place. For us in the evictions product, it would be having a call line. That's a hugely expensive kind of undertaking. But then reaching out to currently existing advice officers and being able to add a piece of technology that will allow people to communicate with them maybe a much simpler way of solving that problem. So just, I think, and exactly as you said, having these conversations in spaces like this where we can really see what each other are doing and how we can, how we can leverage understanding and leverage ideas from one another. I'm just looking at the time and I see that we've already run 2 minutes over. So I don't mean to be that facilitator that just cuts things off at the drop of a hat. But I do really want mindful of everyone's time. And we still do have a last entertainment item for everyone. So yeah, I don't know, Gabby, if you want to say anything, any last final closing words, but from me, just thank you everyone for taking the time today and coming out. It really was nice to hear everyone's perspectives and just get a better understanding of what's happening in the civic tech space, especially in line with kind of project methodologies and planning. So thanks everyone.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. And then Caroline will continue to be in touch after this as well, obviously.
Ufaka maspektu uzo 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 uzo